Hello, everybody. Welcome to Quantum Witch Cafe. This is your safe place to talk about anything paranormal, fringe, UFO, UAP, basically anything without being judged. Tonight we have Mr. Nathaniel Gillis, I'll let him tell you about his specialty. But before we get to that, I want to say thank you to anybody listening on YouTube or listening on Spotify or Anomalous Podcast Network. Thank you so much for your support. Like, subscribe, share, rate, whatever you can do. And thank you to everybody in the chat. I see some lovely people that are always with me. Diesel Girl Stewart, Akashi Chris, UAP Experiencer, Enzo, and Nikki's here, and a bunch of other people will be joining us. So, Nathaniel, do you go by Do you like that? How should I address
It's
you?
okay. It's okay.
Sir,
I've had
Mr.
no, not at all. I'm very informal. I'm really looking. Call me Nathaniel. Nathaniel's fine.
Okay.
That'll work.
Okay. So, Nathaniel, for people that do not know who you are, or sort of just getting, curious about realms outside of their everyday comfort zone, who are you? What do you do?
So, well, first of all, my name is Nathaniel Gillis, as you well know, and I wouldn't say expertise because I don't think you can be an expert in any measure of the phenomenon, but my specialty is researching the footnotes of history with respect to demonology, what our ancestors experienced, the entities that they encountered. And what I've been doing lately is trying to understand what they were experiencing and really what are called behavioral patterns, right? Not just the manifestations, not the apparitions themselves, but what were the behavioral patterns that these entities are doing and performing. And so right now, like I used to be very deep in ancient texts regarding demonology. Now, what I'm doing right now in my career is I'm researching the different various interconnectivities between the UFO abduction phenomenon and what people used to consider to be demons. So that's really where I'm at now with it. So that's really I'll tell you this. I think that's the approach that I share, that I can bring to the table. I'm not an expert in it, and I'm not the one that's going to, say I know for sure what's going on. I don't think any of us do, but that's really my approach to this at this point in my career, understanding it through the ancient lens.
That's great because these patterns obviously have happened and these beings are not new to us in this
Right,
era. So it's very
right.
important to look at our past and present and make those
Mhm.
ties. We're lucky we have you to do that because it's a lot of reading and studying. So how
Yeah,
did you get
yeah.
involved in this? So this is a unique
You
path.
know,
I tell people, um, you know, I'm really excited about having a demonologist on and they're like, whoa, that sounds like, and to me
yeah.
it doesn't. I've always
Mhm.
just been curious about different beings and entities, but how did this start for you? Why did you decide like this is what I'm going to do with my life? This is my interest.
Mhm.
Um, just that whole thing in general.
So I was confronted by the paranormal at the age of 8 years old. My family had moved into a new house in Ohio, and it was even at the open house itself. I started experiencing paranormal phenomenon. I was in this room that my parents were going to give me once we moved in. My dad took me in there and basically said, take a look around, figure out where you're going to put your bed, your gaming system. And he said, I'm going to go out into the living room with your mother. We're going to talk to the realtor. So just hang out for a little bit. I said, okay. And from that moment, I remember smelling this pervasive stench. It smelled like a corpse, it smelled like rotting or organic matter. And one thing that I remember, it was very interesting because I remember there was nothing there. Like obviously there was no dead person there, there was no corpse present. But I realized even at a young age that I was smelling some form of consciousness, that this was a living, vibrant entity that was in that room, present with me. And so I was also led to get on all fours, get down, and I actually unfolded and pulled up the blanket that was on the bed, and I'm looking underneath the bed itself, and I come face to face with this full-bodied apparition. And it was a little girl. She was about maybe 6 years old. She had long black hair. She was pale in complexion. She had a white linen dress that looked to have been made during the turn of the century. And when we kind of met each other eye to eye, she recoiled, I recoiled, and then she shimmied her body all the way to the back of the wall. I cashed out, checked out, deuces, I'm gone.
Mm.
Okay, I'm
Not
gone.
my room, Dad.
No. I was like, all right, okay. And at that point in my life, I was young, I was very
Yeah.
inexperienced, very immature. And so I really told myself at first, okay, I'm not crazy. Yes, there was a girl there, but I believed at that time that she belonged to somebody in the neighborhood or perhaps the family that was actually selling the home itself. Come to find out that neither of those cases were true. She didn't
Wow.
belong in the house at all. And then so once we actually moved in, I started experiencing a very localized manifestation of consciousness. It wasn't just a haunting to where the whole family experienced it. It was something that was
Right.
localized and centered around me. So I would go to bed at night and I could hear somebody displacing their full weight on our wooden floors, hearing it creaking all the way to my door.
Wow.
So there's various manifestations that I experienced in that house, but that's what really led me to want to understand this. What, not just like I said, not just why I was afraid, but was this entity projecting a fabricated fear, or was it just because I didn't understand it, and that's
Right.
why I was terrified. I didn't, I learned how to cope with its presence by trying to understand what was going on. There was no debating it. There was no confronting it. It lived with me. It followed me. There were nights when I would go into a sleep state and I would have a dream where
Mm.
someone would commit suicide. And it was the
Wow.
same dream. It was on a loop. And then I would wake up in a cold sweat, and this presence would be in the room. It would make me feel like I was the smallest particle in the universe.
Oh, wow.
But it left an impression on me. And so the older I became, the more I dove in very deeply into ancient literature, wanting to understand, okay, is the correct model of demonology, is it worth pursuing, right? Because
Mm.
a lot of what we're dealing with doesn't fit into the blueprint of any
Right.
demonology we're aware with. So once I got through that literature, then I began to realize, okay, there are some footprints in the snow. There are behavioral patterns that link the UFO abduction phenomenon to ancient demonological
Wow.
experiences. And then so that's where I am today. But that's it's very fascinating. But guys, this is very dark too. It's not just,
Yeah.
okay, I have a curiosity. A lot of people
Yes.
have a fatal curiosity in this stuff.
Mm.
And but that's more or less my story.
Wow, that's very powerful. And you've talked to so many people, and you know that you're not the only one having this experience. I
Correct.
thought I was going crazy for a little bit.
Hmm.
After, my grandmother was a medium. Everybody in the chat's like, yeah, we know. They've probably heard this 1,000 times from me. But she was open to things, and she was Catholic. She was
Hmm.
very like into her saints and angels and dreams and all this, Jesus and the God. And she would tell a demon to F off if she thought there was one hanging around.
Hmm.
So I don't know if that just opened up the whole area where we were, but I had similar experiences. And then especially after having my first UFO sighting at 5, things
Hmm.
intensified.
Wow.
So
Wow.
it's very interesting that you're drawing this parallel, because growing up Catholic, I always thought it was demons and angels, and then learning more, and I always knew there was like aliens or extraterrestrials as well. So like it's just
Hmm.
super weird how not people kind of shun the thought of the link between the two, but then
Right.
we still don't know enough to say that it's not what's happening.
Correct.
So
Correct.
this is what you are. This is one of your newer theories, or how long have you been presenting this?
I've been presenting this for the last probably about the last year and a half.
Okay.
And a lot of what I battle with are, I'll just be honest with you guys. I would just, I'm going to be very frank. A lot of
And you're allowed to
ufologists.
be frank. Like, you're not going to scare anybody here. If you do, this isn't
Okay.
their show, because I don't want you to. I'm tired of the sugarcoating of this stuff, because
Right.
it
Right.
doesn't meet the reality when people come face to face with a quote unquote demon or mean alien or mean extraterrestrial. So
Mhm.
please speak freely here.
Well, what I realized early on in the research is that there's a lot of ufologists that are completely illiterate regarding Eastern literature. And so when they say they're not demons, what they're really saying without knowing it is they're not Catholic demons, right? And so what they do is they project their own dogma on what they perceive to be dogma, and it just kills the conversation. Because in order to have an intelligent conversation, we have to realize that there are different mythologies that have different demonologies. And so I think that, to be honest with the literature, instead of holding the dogma, looking at the data, I think that it would help us further the field. But in demonology, one of the big interconnectivities that inspired me to research the abduction phenomenon was realizing that as far back in millennia, in ancient history, the late Iron Age, we have these entities manifesting to women in the images of their lovers, in the images of foreign, like boyfriends. Some of them have lived and died, and these entities were literally, there's no exaggeration here, literally weaponizing images in their minds and stepping into roles in order to inseminate them and then to pluck the child or the baby out of the womb and missing fetus syndrome. So within the field of ufology, we have a lot of people who think, okay, their research has not been expansive enough. And so they'll say, okay, this phenomenon is modern. They just started doing this since 1960. And I think that is a little bit of a narrow view. And that's one view that I first thought. I held on to a lot of that, dogma, but the data doesn't suggest that at all. And I think that what I had to do with demonology itself is I had to put it aside and say that there's a lot of data here that just doesn't add up. There's a lot of beliefs and mythologies, and really it was just suspicions, and it wasn't really based on any
Yeah.
fact. But the case studies, they speak for themselves, and I think we're gonna see that tonight.
So in your mind, or in your we kind of like touched on this a little bit beforehand.
Mhm.
A demon isn't, necessarily like Catholicism and Christianity view demon as one way, and that's just one,
Right.
like anything that's Christ based, I would say, has that view of the demon.
Mhm.
In other places in the world, the demons do different things. They're not
Mhm.
just like these horrible, for example, in Japan, the demons
Mhm.
there are different than demons here,
Right.
or in,
Right.
in church demons. I mean, demons probably aren't in church. I don't really know, but you know what I mean.
I'm picking up what you're putting
Your
down. I
church demons.
completely agree. Yeah.
So
Yeah. It doesn't fit. It doesn't fit. And early on in my career, I started, going to my youth pastors and my pastor and all of these experts, literally like linguists, and saying, okay, does this really fit the blueprint? What are shadow people? Do you have any evidence of shadow people in demonology? And all of these different case studies. And but that's really what I've been doing, because I believe that the literature speaks for itself, and I think that we need to at least give an ear to it. A lot of this stuff. Let's get back to the idea of a demon. Uh, our ancestors perceived demons to be entities that would give negative messages. So if you were an entity that was a messenger, and if you gave them a negative message, you were a demon. However, if it was a positive message, guess what? You're an angel.
exactly.
So it was just filtered through their worldviews. Now, it's not to say we don't have cases of abduction in antiquity, and it's not to say we don't have cases of what we would consider to be the incubus, phenomenon. But there is a sweeping gesture of manipulation occurring throughout history, even into modernity, where it places us as a species in a very peculiar position, because we are dealing with something parasitic.
Yes.
And who cares if we call it alien or demon? I
Right.
personally have a theory we're going to get into, but I think we need to really clarify what we mean by demon and get into the ancient text so we can understand what they read and not just what they wrote.
Yes, absolutely. And I totally am all about that, because people think that they're discovering things now, but
Mhm.
they're not discovering. They're just understanding something from the past in a different way, or in a
Correct.
language that is receptible to them. So you had
Correct.
mentioned, and I think, you had mentioned something called, was it apparitional abduction?
Yes, and that's a very real thing. Apparitional abduction is pervasive in this field. And what we're dealing with right now are experiencers, a lot of them, who are thinking that they're being abducted bodily. And then, so they see without their real eyes, they hear without their real ears, they experience, they think. And while the whole time their body's in bed, or their body's in the car that they left. And then it's not until the abduction ends that, and this is what they call it, that they become physical again.
Right.
And then they realize, oh my God, that entire situation was me being out of my body. And this is a narrative that it's everywhere in the field of ufology, because even with Betty and Bob Luca, they literally peeled Betty Luca's soul out of her body. They peeled her apparition.
Wow.
Bob, her husband, for the researchers out there, this is Ray Fowler's work. But yeah, Bob leaned over one night in the middle of the night and looked and watched her apparition leave her body and float out. And these entities peeled literally her soul out of her body. Now, the reason this should give us pause as a species is because this is happening without our consent, number one.
Absolutely.
And number two, they're actually educating the soul and not the body. Literally, like, it's crazy because it's okay. Like we had one case of an abduction experience where they took the soul, they placed the soul in a chair, and the chair itself was tailored, almost like it was molded after her apparition.
Wow,
Now,
that's crazy.
yeah, it's a whole different dimension of abduction here. But yes, there are a tremendous amount of case studies that imply, not even imply, they absolutely say that there are people who are having their souls pulled out of their bodies, and that these entities are not just abducting the soul, not just manipulating it, but they're treating the soul like we would treat the body. Okay, so they're working on the soul. They're taking things from it. They're putting things into it. And we also have evidence. It's not just, okay, apparitional theory is what this is called. But we also have evidence, because I know it's already 8:18.
Oh, you're fine.
All right. We also have
I tell you an hour, but if we run over and it's okay with you,
okay.
you guys are my date tonight. So you guys are my night.
Sweet.
So
Sweet. So we do have evidence as well that it's not just that it's a soulish abduction or an apparitional kidnapping, but it's also that once the soul gets back into the body, that the skin begins to manifest whatever was done to the soul.
right.
Now there's a picture that I emailed to you. You don't have to put it on
All
now
right.
unless you have access to it.
Well, I'll get those ready while you're talking about
Okay.
this and while I'm
Okay.
listening.
So with Betty Luca, keep in mind they pulled her soul out of her body. She's disembodied. She would be what we would consider to be a ghost. Her apparitional self is kidnapped and abducted. But when she's placed back into her body, both her and her husband witness skin manifestations, markings on her body that were not there until she was back into it. Now, this is also known throughout biblical antiquity in Mesopotamia. They taught, it's in Ezekiel chapter 13 in the Bible. It's also in your Akkadian texts, that there was a species of necromancer that existed, and that when you would come in contact with them, you would possess some form of spiritual vulnerability. In other words, like, it would affect the soul first. It was called pollution. And then once it was a spiritual condition, then it would manifest from the inside out.
Wow.
Right? So it was soul first, skin second. And so in biblical antiquity, what they would do was they would go show themselves to the priest. This is going to be very interesting because I'm going to link some very good info here.
Let me know when you want the
Yep.
pictures, because
Okay.
I downloaded them. So
Okay. Okay. But these individuals would go and show themselves to the priest, and the priest would say, okay, have you experienced a certain amount of phenomenon here? Have you encountered a necromantic, or it's really what's called a necromantic species? Have you encountered these entities? And they would say yes. And so then they would perform a ritual. Now, the Catholics bastardized this. They called it the exorcism.
okay.
Really, it was what's called, it's holy water, but it was a form of baptism that was designed to cleanse someone from corpse pollution.
Oh, wow. A lot of the herbs and such, right, that they used to
Yep.
use in some people use it now as like Florida water. A lot of the herbs that are in these like cleansing waters were used all the way back in the Middle Ages to sort of hide decomposition, smells, and actually to put on the body in funeral homes before formaldehyde was a thing, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, and it's very interesting because throughout history, it wasn't just, okay, that if you encounter a corpse in a house, you're polluted, but it was also that if you encounter the consciousness that was in the corpse.
Wow.
So what was happening is you had people who were literally being possessed with the consciousness that was in that corpse, and then then they would perform the ritual. But that's what they were doing. And so if you experience this necromantic species, they would perform this corpse pollution to get clean and get all the just whatever, the darkness out, whatever. Moving forward, we see again it's the soul first, skin second. With Betty Luca, the same behavioral pattern: soul first, skin second. And I do believe what's happening a lot of times is there are people that are not realizing that they're being plucked out of their bodies. And then when they get back into their bodies, they're seeing the manifestation on the skin, thinking they pulled my body and not the soul. Does this make sense?
Yes, and that would make sense to anybody that's not been reading about exorcisms. That is what most
Correct.
people will call it, or abductions, because
Right.
this whole thing happens like what in the dream time is what people think, and then
Dream
you wake
state.
up and you're like, well, it must have been real because I have either like
Yeah.
finger marks on my skin or you know implants or like just different things happening.
100%. 100%. And so the soul first, the skin second. Now, the reason I suggest that is because not just that I found that behavioral pattern in hauntology and ufology, but I've worked on cases personally in hauntings where people have been attacked. And here's something that this is very interesting. I can't explain it, but it's real. Where there's a burning sensation that occurs, and there's a scarification that occurs subdermally underneath the skin, and then it moves itself to the surface.
Wow.
So it points to that these entities, again, that they're not attacking the body, they're attacking the soul, and it's manifesting on the body. Put that aside. I was doing a lecture one night talking about different scarifications in demonology and how, there were demons that would carve symbols underneath people's eyelids, and they had no idea their whole life, and then they would do an autopsy, all of this stuff.
Wow.
And this individual reached out to me, said, I want to talk to you about my father. He said, my father is dead now. He said, so I can tell a story. So we get to, sharing emails back and forth. And finally, he sends me a couple pictures regarding scarifications that his father suffered. Here is his story. He said that my father was a renowned remote viewer in the city, and he would go into trances. He would meet his guides. Sounds like an abduction. He would leave his body. He would meet these entities, and they would give him prophecies. This is what's going to happen. There's a person that you work with, and I want you to tell them A, B, and C. And then he would return to his body, and then he would go and tell them, what he was told to tell them. He said one night, my father stumbled down the stairs. He was incoherent. He was traumatized, and he couldn't breathe. And he said finally he just passed out, had a heart attack. And he said once we got into the hospital, we're taking his shirt off to put the robe on him. He said at that particular moment, through the skin, underneath the skin, he said we began to witness symbols. And there's a picture that I seen. You could pick either one, but it's a man's chest.
All right, I'm not a pro at this. Share screen.
You're making me feel better because I'm not either.
Oh no, this is the first time I've shared something that people know. So screen sharing works on the best computer. Okay, let's see. I know how to do it, guys.
It's okay. So
I will figure it. Yeah, keep going while I figure it out.
Okay, so
you guys see that?
Underneath the skin. Uh-oh.
Did it show up and then it went away? All right.
It's all good.
Let me know if you can see it. Can you see it?
I can't see anything. Let me get to the chat. No.
Okay.
It's okay. It's okay.
There she is. Okay.
There we go.
There we go.
So these scarifications were subdermal first. And he said that it was crazy because they witnessed them. So imagine this. Underneath the skin, they emerged to the surface of the skin. Now, what had happened during his soul abduction is that he met these entities and realized that these entities were not what he thought they were. He said they looked like what they usually looked like, and they flanked him on the right and left sides. He said, but suddenly something changed. The atmosphere changed, and they changed their appearance. He said at that point, he remembers being slammed back into his body, feeling a burning sensation in his chest, and then passing out with a heart attack. These are the amulets that they carved into him subdermally. I believe, again, they're doing it to the soul that's manifesting on the skin.
Wow.
Now,
That's
right, and I'm not the only one of the researchers out here that have had a case like this. Steve Mera had a case like this, and the individual actually died from encountering these entities. But I would like everybody to pay attention here, because this is when demonology starts to fall apart, and this is why I'm starting to lean heavily into, yes, it has things to offer us in terms of literature, but they're playing by different rules here because they're playing a different game. Okay, so if you notice, that's the Star of David, and that's a
yeah.
cross on the left. I'm still working with a linguist out there who's helping me with the translation of what's underneath that star. But I want to say this very carefully, and I need you all to pay close attention. Demonology does not work like this.
Hmm.
You have the Star of David. You will not have a Jewish rabbi out there casting a devil out with the cross,
Right.
right? Because he doesn't believe in that. He'll use the
Yes.
Star of David, right? Vice versa. Conversely, rather, you have the cross. You're not going to have a priest out there using the Star of David because he's not a rabbinic Jew or whatever. He's a Catholic priest. So what they're showing us right now is that they're eclipsing the microcosm of known religious amulets. And they're using these amulets against us in a way that we're ignorant of. It's
That
bigger.
is super that's crazy, because when you grow up with a certain belief and you learn certain things, those are the things you're supposed to be protected by. For example,
Correct.
in a lot of my mean alien slash demonic attack things as a child and up until my mid 20s and even 30s, there was several times where if I was wearing like a cross, or people are probably, well, you're a witch, why are you wearing a cross? Because I still, pagans believe in all sorts of everything. We'll
Right.
take all the gods. But I did have a beautiful view of Jesus. So I had a Jesus necklace, very much like this Archangel Michael one.
Mhm.
And in the dream, they would rip it off me and they would
Mhm.
stop torturing me.
Mhm. Yeah.
But I was taught, in Catholic school, if you have a cross, if you're wearing a cross or a saint, or you have a cross on your wall, or even in like witchcraft, people think the pentagram is like demonic symbols, but to witches, it's actually very protective.
Mhm.
Even something like that. Do you know what I mean? So it's very
Yes, absolutely,
crazy.
absolutely.
It's interesting
Yeah,
and scary.
absolutely. It's very weird. It's like, with the Catholic rite of exorcism, they get it out of what's called, it's a scripture. It's Numbers chapter 19, verse 11. And it was never designed to cleanse someone, like I said, from like some fallen angel, in Greek mythology that got his wings cut. It was literally designed to cleanse somebody from being possessed by
Wow.
consciousness itself. And so that's really what I believe we're dealing with these entities, because, I mean, by all accounts, it's almost as if they're pulling us into the dimension of the afterlife, where they pluck the soul out of the body, and at that point we become the ghost, and now we can go through walls, right? Now we can, and that's, I think, it's also another reason why when a lot of people are abducted, that they witnessed other apparitional entities. Can I go down this? It's not a pig trail, but we'll
Oh,
we'll
go
figure it
for
out.
it.
Okay.
Go
Okay.
for it.
So, all right. So there is a theory that I'm working on, that I'm building a lot of evidence for, that a lot of these entities are not just embodied. It's not just that they have physical bodies, but there is evidence in the field and the literature that suggests that they can astrally project themselves just like we can,
Mm.
to where, right, to where you're literally looking at an apparition, not just the body itself. Like with Betty Lucas' case, and with a lot of Dr. Cole Turner's work, these entities will just walk through a wall. However, it's very strange. They can dematerialize and materialize at will. That's
Yes.
apparitional, very much apparitional. Even like if you get into the American Society for Psychical Research, they talk about that capability, where the entity, at least ghosts, they can walk through a wall and then
Yeah.
materialize to the touch.
And we see that with
So,
UFOs as well, right? Like craft,
right.
transmedium, whether it be into the water or through a wall.
Mhm. Correct, correct. And so my research itself is leading me to believe that we're not dealing with aliens in its entirety. I think that the most alien thing to us as a species is the afterlife. And I think that at least some of these creatures were formerly human, were formerly embodied, and now they're in an apparitional dimension. And I think, let me go deeper. I do believe that that's why when we're abducted in the soul, they converse to the soul. They talk to it,
Mm.
right? They don't have to use the mouth. It's almost as if there is a unified stream of consciousness that they connect to
Yes.
with the experiencer that transcends bodily presence. Now it's the soulish dimension. And so when we're dealing with this hypothesis of, okay, it's not just physical abduction, that these entities are literally sucking the soul out, then we have to ask ourselves why. Why is it that when we have experiencers on ships that they're suggesting, hey guys, the ship itself was breathing, there was pulsating, there was consciousness in the
Yes.
metal itself, right? So
Yes.
that's where I'm at with my research. And I will say this. I found every amount of technology these entities are demonstrating. I found it at ancient necromantic rituals. Period.
Interesting. That's very
Yeah.
interesting. So this has been a long, I mean, we've all known, I think a lot of the people that watch my show and are listening to my show are very
Mhm.
open.
Mhm.
Um, you know, I don't have a lot of pure nuts and bolts people that
Yep.
don't delve into like, ancient religions or ancient texts involving the phenomenon, whether it be angels,
Mhm.
demons, jinn, anything really.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I think that you'll find that everybody's very open to these things. There's more
Sure.
people that are open to what you're saying than you might realize because
Right.
it's been a new kind of like buzz in the UFO world. Like the consciousness is key. And a lot of us have known this, like early experiencers of entities that we can't describe or abduction
Mhm.
scenarios, contactees, whether it be spirits or extraterrestrial or interdimensional. We are kind of struggling we know that the consciousness plays a huge role. And I had said
Right.
at one point, like, it's almost like they abducted my consciousness because I was in my bed and I see myself in my bed.
Mhm.
But like I can't wake up anybody. And, so, I think that a lot of people are leaning towards that, and also,
Mhm.
like you said, they're taking you into almost another realm, and a
Yes,
lot
a
of people talk
portal.
about people talk about, like, the thinning of realms and, it's not physical there, like, physicality is only bound by this planet, what it weighs,
Right.
its dimensions, how fast it's spinning and traveling, we are
Mhm.
very, like, kind of, like, egotistical to think that this is the only way that things happen.
Of course, and it's hard on us as researchers and experiencers not to get dogmatic about it, because we're so hungry for inspiration and we don't want to be groping in the darkness. We want some sort of reality to believe in.
Absolutely.
It's a very interesting phenomenon. Like I said, a lot of their capabilities we find in antiquity regarding necromancy,
That's interesting.
which
Can you
again,
elaborate on that? I'm
for
very curious
sure.
about that because that's something that I haven't been able to find
Mhm.
beyond, like, your cookie cutter books on.
Okay.
Just because I read about everything, not that I want to necromance guys, like, but I'm just saying, like, I it's int I read about everything, even if it's
Okay.
scary to some people, so,
Yeah, that's a good characteristic to have. I believe in that too. You got to have some curiosity about you. But yeah, so when I started getting into demonology, I started realizing that there were two kinds of theories in Mesopotamia, and really the cradle of civilization, really. But they had two different kinds of demons. Number one, they believed, okay, there were entities that were somehow divine. They had some kind of apparitional membrane about them where they would show up, they would induce you
Mm.
into some sleep state, impress you with their capabilities and presence, and then they would leave and they would think, okay, that person's divine or that entity's divine. The second kind of demon, the second theory they had was that there were people that were evil that died and mutated into demons,
Mm.
which is heavily that's where I lean heavily, and I think that's why again the exorcistic rite in antiquity was what to cleanse someone from consciousness that did not belong in their body, right?
Right.
Alien. So again, I think that is more along the lines of that second theory that when there are some people that die, and the only way for them to stay alive is to self-replicate. Matter of fact, James Frazier, this is going to be very interesting because a lot of this stuff is very new to people. But James Frazier was an anthropologist. He wrote a book called The Golden Bow, and he talks about the origin of possession throughout history. And he said that it originated on the battlefield when some soldier was mortally wounded, in order for him to survive, he would dispossess his own body and place his soul or its consciousness in someone or something
Mm.
else.
So is that kind of like remote viewing, but into a
To
person?
a point, yes, yes.
Hmm.
It's foreign to us in terms of our evolution, right? The only time you'll ever hear somebody doing this is people who think of astrally projecting,
Yes.
bilocation, which these
Mm.
entities are, doing bilocation. But you won't find a lot of people interested in this phenomenon unless they've experienced it themselves. But these people knew that in order to stay alive, they had to self-replicate. They had to find a body in which to place their soul or their consciousness. And so throughout history, what they started doing, even as in Genesis 6, what's called the Apocrypha of John, they
Yeah.
started these entities that were ghosts. They would started manifesting to women in the images of a lover,
Mm.
right? And then they would take the seed that they stole from a man, and then they would inseminate the body, and then they would create a fetus in the womb. Then they would steal that fetus and place their consciousness in it. This is the Apocrypha of John. It's a Coptic manuscript preserved by Egyptian
Yes.
monks. Okay.
Yes.
What it says is that they started doing was they weren't satisfied with just possessing Dear Aunt Edna, because there was an inconsistency about it. Because you would have a male trying to possess a female, or somebody who did not have the same apparitional appearance as the body that they were possessing. So it didn't fit. So what these entities started doing, they were performing what's called an abstratic tradition. This is going to be a lot of information, but we'll get to it. An abstratic tradition where they would appear to the female in the image of a husband they were with, or a lover. They would inseminate her, and then they would stare into her eyes. And at the moment of conception, they would reverse their apparition. Now, according to antiquity, the reason they did that is because they wanted a body that looked like their own apparitions.
Oh, okay.
Right. And so
It
what we're
wasn't just to
looking at,
freak you out, like, you
no,
know?
right, yeah. No, what they were literally doing was birthing the material image through the fetus of their bodily apparition. So now the apparition fits the body. They both look like each other. It was a way
Wow.
of preserving their life. Okay. And so as these entities begin to mutate and evolve in their technology and their belief systems, then they started working with what they considered to be idolaters or necromancers rather, and they taught them a form of technology where these necromancers would go out and they would find a recently deceased person. They would dig them up out of the grave. They would take them into their house. They would take a small piece of metal, hollow implant,
Did not
right?
know this about necromancy because this is
Yeah,
we hear
yeah.
about this.
And they would take that small piece of metal and they would carve the name of an unclean spirit or demon on it, and then they would place or implant that piece of metal inside the body, and then the consciousness of that entity would merge with the metal, hello alive UFOs, and
Right.
then would possess the body itself and
Hmm.
communicate. Now the eyes work again, right? And so what we're looking at with these entities, like I said, and I'm tying this into a little bow, hopefully, is that we're not just dealing with the hardware of the body, we're dealing with the software of their apparitions,
Wow.
right? So that's why I'm telling at least everybody I can get on a show with, we're dealing with some necromantic technology here. And if they are in fact necromancers, it would make a lot more sense as to why they have a profound knowledge about the hidden potential of the soul, because they are souls. Number
That
two,
makes sense. Yeah.
it would also make perfect sense as to why we have the missing fetus syndrome,
Mm.
right?
Yes, and
But
people
yeah,
link that all to the hybridization program, all synonymous
yes,
with it's still a hybridization program in that if they're doing
yeah,
that,
very much
right?
so, very much so. So when I started getting into the demonological literature, I mean, my God, guys, pregnancy was a form of possession to these entities. Possession was a form of pregnancy for them too. In the 16th century, we had cases, I would call them dream abductions, where women in
Mm.
in Israel, it's a province in Israel called Safdi, women were being visited in the middle of the night by entities that looked like a former boyfriend, a former lover, or even their husband. And in the dream state, these entities would begin to try to cause intercourse. I don't know if I could say it. Some shows I could say that, but
I'm not monetized yet, so I think
okay,
we can say a lot of
forgive
things.
me.
You're fine. Hey,
Um,
no, you like I really mean it. I'm not somebody
yeah,
that offends easily. I lived in
okay,
Las Vegas for a while, and nothing really surprises me. So
okay. Yeah, so they would encounter these entities, but they would encounter them in a dream state, and so it's to them it was a lot easier to do things in a dream because it's
yeah.
not real to them. So what started happening to them is after the dream state lifted, like you said, they would have different scarifications on their bodies that would mirror what they experienced. And so the next thing you know, we had people that they weren't just accosted and assaulted by these entities, but they became possessed by the consciousness of the entity they encountered. And then there was yet another mutation. In the Kabbalistic texts, we have individuals who were not just possessed by the entity they encountered, they were pregnant with the consciousness of that entity. To the point where we have case study after case study after case study of women going to the priests, the rabbis rather, and the entity itself is in the fetal position in their womb to where it looks like they're pregnant. And so
Mhm.
these exorcists begin to ask the most profound question, other than how can a virgin be a father or a mother? Other than that, is this individual possessed by or pregnant with the entity? This is why, again, we need to look at this entire
Yes.
phenomenon, at least through consciousness. Because again, if we're going to be dealing with the fact that it's not just being pregnant with the hardware, right? But it's also being pregnant with the software that's in the fetus, right? And
Yes.
I believe that's what they've been doing all along, is using that replication program to stay alive.
That makes a
It's
lot
a
of sense. It does to me, um,
mhm,
because we even use I mean, especially when and people like this doesn't have to be physical. Like the
mhm,
obviously the metal implant is physical, the scarification becomes physical, or the raised oh my god, symbols
mhm,
become physical, but at the same time, like consciousness can create these we know this with stress, right? Like it creates physical
correct.
manifestations of disease or disease. And
Mhm,
why would a consciousness not affect you physically, especially if it's some sort of energy we don't understand yet? And if everything is
mhm,
like energy, vibration, frequency, all that stuff, then
mhm,
like we had to realize that if you're pregnant with some consciousness that's not yours,
mhm.
that's against your free will.
Right.
It's an
Without
attachment.
consent.
And this
Mhm,
thing can happen pretty young too, right? Because we're seeing some
mhm,
parallels with like the whole ET hybridization stuff, which isn't
mhm,
always physical. A lot of this
mhm.
happens in the dream state, and we're seeing it early,
Correct.
and then we're seeing it pretty much around the time where a male or female reaches,
Puberty.
their puberty, and then we're
Right.
seeing it later on in life as, the female usually is entering, like, premenopause, and then the
Mhm.
male, like, gets more frequent visiting because I guess you guys don't go bad like we do. So,
Oh Lord.
you
It's
guys
actually really interesting. It's really funny you mentioned that because now we're going to get into the programs that these entities have been performing on us. Um, we're going to get into the incubi research, the incubus and succubus phenomenon. And indeed, that's what we call them as demonologists. Okay,
Mm.
there's succubus, incubus. Really, it's just one of the programs that they're running on us during abductions.
So can you
Um,
explain Incubus and Succubus to somebody that might not be knowledgeable about
yes.
it?
So when these entities got bored or for whatever reason they mutated, they moved away from milking the carcasses of the dead, by the way. They mutated and they started taking seed from living men and then impregnating living women. And so what they would do is if it was a woman, and then in history they would appear to the woman in the image of a man. Like I said, somebody that they were actually intimate with. And these entities, and I've
Right.
had cases like this, these entities had actually weaponized memories that these individuals had against them. In other words, if the individual that like if the man that they're trying to be to this woman, if he wore protection, they would not manifest to that woman as that man, because the
Mm.
probability of this woman receiving the seed is nixed. So what they would do is they knew that much about the memory, the consciousness, and what, the images she had in her head. But anyways, they would manipulate the situation. If they had to put them into a dream state to make it work, they would. If they had to tempt them sexually in terms of heightened lust or whatever you want to call it in sexuality, they would. And to get them, whatever they would have to do in order to inseminate them, and that's what they would do. And so what we have throughout history is these entities literally playing roles given to them
Hmm.
unwillfully, literally just a projection of the mind that they step into, and I'll be that person as long as I can get this done. And
Hmm.
so particularly if it was a male spirit appearing to a female, that spirit was called an incubus. If it was a female spirit appearing to the male to harvest the seed, it was a succubus.
Now this
Now,
isn't always now they don't always
yeah,
use those techniques. It's not always a
right,
pleasant, "Oh, that was just me hooking up with Henry again," or whatever, you know what I mean? It's
right,
like it was,
right.
sometimes people are, they're violated when they don't wanna be,
Of
so
course. Well, either way, right? I believe either way, it's a like you said, it's an assault. You know what I mean? It's not like, okay, I'm giving consent, right? It's way deeper than that, and way darker. But what these entities started to do is they started working programs, literally, like it's like a stage. The stage is set. There's a performance to the experiencer. The experiencer is not realizing this is actually occurring. And one of the ways I believe they're doing that is they're hacking. They're looking into the eyes and they're hacking what's called the frontal media orbital cortex. It's right behind the eyes.
Mhm.
It's that portion of our brain that tells us whether or not what we're experiencing is real. Moving deeper, we even have cases in witch era literature of what they consider to be witches, but these witches would be abducted. They'd be taken to sabbats, and
Mm.
they would just witness a program. Literally, these entities were acting out roles in front of them, to where some witches thought, okay, I'm having intercourse with a demon, or I'm having an intercourse with a corpse. And then
Right.
inevitably, in one fleeting moment, the frequency that was used to design this whole set and stage, it went out. And for a fleeting moment, they looked around and realized that that's not a real male appendage. That's not a real man. That's not even a real alien. That's not even a real corpse. What they were being poked with was metallic objects.
Like a medical procedure type.
Correct.
Mm.
Correct. And they were taken over and then implanting seed. And so I need to dive deeper into this, because I do not believe for a second that these entities look like grays. I believe, just like through history, they've been wearing different masks. And we also have case studies of experiencers who saw the gray apparition at first, so the entity turned sideways. And then he realized it was a projection of that apparition
Mm.
that wanted the experiencer to believe I'm a gray. And so whatever's going on here throughout history, it is a manipulation of our species that is designed to self-replicate through us. And but that's my little rant.
Oh, it's alright. I
It's
mean,
horrific.
it's interesting though, because no, I think that anything that comes out of your mouth is for a purpose, or anybody's, even if
Mhm.
it's not, even if,
Yeah.
just everybody hears something at the time they should hear it, I think. I was describing to a lot of people, I was like, they were like grays, but they were demons
Right.
to me,
It's
and I didn't know if
the
that was because
apparitional
Catholic
quality.
conditioning, or if it was because of the facade they were putting that glitched out or something, so it's interesting you bring
Yeah,
that up.
absolutely. It's the projection of an image. If these entities have the ability to project deceased loved ones, uh, I'm going to give you a case study here. It's from Dr. Carla Turner's work. She had a man who was a psychic medium, and just like the remote viewer that I was working with, he would go into trance states and be abducted, and he would meet his guides. Well, one day he was abducted with his grandmother, and it freaked him out because the guides that he thought was helping him were deceiving him, and they were trying to groom. And I use that as loosely, but they were trying to groom his grandmother into intercourse. And she looked at them. This is how quick they can respond. This is how quick they can instantly run a program on somebody. She says, She says, I've only been intimate with one man, and that's my husband.
Mm.
He's been deceased now for 11 years. Instantly, from the shadows emerges her husband. That wasn't her husband,
No.
right? It's just like the witch era literature. That wasn't a corpse. When all is said and done, whatever's happening behind the scenes, is not exactly what we think it is. So I don't know how much of that should be considered demonic, because I think if we get outside of the dogma, what's the base nature of the demon? It's to deceive,
Right.
it's to manipulate, it's all that stuff.
Mm.
But that's really where my research is understanding the different ways they manipulate us and weaponize our beliefs against us. It's very, very, very damning for us as a species.
It is, and whatever, like you said, we have to look at what represents a demon. It's not always
Mhm.
this little horned thing,
Right,
and it
right.
usually isn't when people actually see it, other than artwork.
Mhm.
And so, how does this work on the flip side? Like, so where do the angels come in? I guess, or the nice extraterrestrials, or the
Okay.
ascended master type spirit guides. Where does that play into all of
Well,
this?
I don't know that yet. I'll tell you why. Because when you get into ancient literature, even texts that precede Genesis, like the earliest text that we have regarding the term angel was Ugaritic. Okay,
Hmm.
so we found our archaeologists, say that 4 times. Our archaeologists discovered ancient ritualistic bowls where people were carving names of what they called angels. In the Ugaritic text, they were called malakuma. And so in Hebrew theology, they retranslated deceased ancestor, hollow consciousness, right? Deceased
Hmm.
ancestor, that's what the Ugaritic text mentioned them as, angels, ghosts.
Hmm.
And then what the Hebrew mythology did is they retranslated and said, well, these are some divine beings, and here's why they did that. It comes from the Atrahasis epic, where it says the soul of a man. That's the apparitional quality they're pulling out of everybody. So they said the soul of a man is the flesh of a god. It was that belief system that influenced our ancestors to say that apparition is divine, right? And so instead of demonizing some entities, they divinized others.
Hmm.
However, on the base nature of it, it's still consciousness.
Right.
Makes sense? It's still people who've lived and died and who have molded their bodies. Some have mutated, some have evolved. So I don't know, again, understanding the nature of the angel and understanding what it meant in the beginning of history, I don't know. I don't know that we do have ascended masters in the sense like you're asking, because these entities are showing a different morality. They're showing a different value system, almost a different currency,
Mm.
and different symbols. So I don't know how to answer that, to be honest with you. I do for sure know that there are at least entities that have mutated and
Right.
that have evolved against us. They're not our buddies.
Yes, yes. I'm just asking because a lot of people, I mean, including myself, like I felt like I would
Mhm.
have a scary ET experience, and then I would have like almost like a damage control good experience with
Mhm.
either like a light being that was just a human shape, but light, that I
Mhm.
just thought was an angel because being raised Catholic, or, a nice extraterrestrial, like people will talk about, like, the different ET races, like
Mhm.
Pleiadians, or like, they're the good guys, right? And out in the galactic world, I guess.
Yeah.
So I just didn't know how that played into everything, because they normally don't do anything. They don't have intercourse with you in most
Right.
cases. I mean, there's
Right.
this experience for everybody out there, I guess, but
Mhm.
um, for the most part, they're here like people talk about spirit guides and such, and a lot of
Correct.
them are people's ancestors. So
Mhm.
that makes sense how you're saying, like, somebody's.
Yeah.
So it's
I'm
just
sorry. Yeah.
interesting. I just didn't know how that all,
I
or if you knew how that all played into all of this.
well, I think that I could say this. I have worked with angels in my past, like at least what we would call angels. I had a case where it was a murder, and I had to do a cleansing in the house, and it was a profound manifestation. It was 2 girls had murdered. It was like a 13-year-old girl, and I think it was a 12-year-old girl and a 15-year-old girl. And they set out to murder a family. They killed them, one of the mother. And long story short, yeah, I worked with what we would call an angel, but again, it's just like demonology. You really can't put a finger
Right.
right. It's almost as if these are liminal beings where they're not just interdimensional, but they're in between worlds.
Yeah.
And I think that's, again, that points to the interdimensionality of the soul, where if it's out of
Right.
body, it's tangible to the touch, but it's also apparitional. Um, but so that's really my stance here. And okay, we have 3 minutes. Um, my
You
research
can,
again.
we're coming up on the hour. If you need to go over a little bit, it's
Okay,
fine. I know that we
okay,
said an hour. If you need it, if an hour is good for you and you want to stop, we can stop. If you want to go a little bit over, we can go over.
mhm, mhm,
I'm open to
okay,
whatever is going to give you, the time you need
okay.
to
That's
explain it.
fine. I'm going to give you a case study that was considered by what's called the Collins Elite. And for those who are not aware of the Collins Elite was a group that was formed in 1960. It was a group of researchers in the federal government who
Hmm.
did have a religious background, but they wanted to investigate this phenomenon in the lens of the occult. Like, what are the occultic rituals and manifestations of these creatures? Why is it that Aleister Crowley performed a ritual, the Amon Ra ritual,
Mm.
and then created, Lamb, which is an entity that manifested, looked just like what we would call an alien gray. But this group of researchers, they scoured all across the world looking at this idea of what I would consider to be a soul hunter,
Hmm.
and where these entities are using our souls to it's not that they feed on them like we eat chicken wings, but they would use us as batteries or some form of value as currency, really.
Right. Wow.
And so they begin to work with a guy named Paul Garrett. And Paul Garrett, by all measures, was just a house painter. Paul Garrett had a near-death experience, which if you look closely enough at the soul abduction, it looks like an OBE, because it is.
Yes.
It looks like a near-death experience because I believe it is.
Yeah, I do too. I totally agree with that.
Right. And so Paul Garrett had a catastrophic accident, and he remembers leaving his body, and out of body, he looked up into the sky and he saw a fleet of these living UFOs. And he said that they hovered over the crowd. There was a crowd of people underneath or below the UFOs, and they hovered over them. And all of a sudden, out of every person, there emerged this ball of light. And then it went into the ship. And he said that when that occurred, every person that had their soul taken from them began to look around as if like they had no, like their consciousness is gone. The
Wow.
body was alive, right? But their memories were sucked out, their mind, their intellect, their belief, everything that animated that body as them was abducted and taken. And so the Collins elite took that theory and began to investigate the apparitional abduction in the sense that are these creatures, these entities, harvesting souls for whatever reason. So when I started looking into that, I started getting into different case studies where people are abducted and they literally on a ship and they look in across the ship, they see a loved one,
Yeah.
or like Whitley Strieber saw a deceased friend,
Yeah. People
right?
always see family members in the
Correct,
ships,
correct.
and there's even, people say it runs in the family too. Like it's
Mhm.
like generational.
Correct, correct. And so they begin to investigate that motif in the research. And so when I got a hold of that, I thought, oh my God, what's really going on here? Is it possible that there is a new form of abduction, or perhaps the real form, or at least another version of it,
Mm.
where there are people that have been taken apparitionally, never to be returned again,
Yes. You made a post
right?
about this the other day, and I was like, I never thought about that. But then
Right?
I thought about spiritual walk-ins that people talk about.
Correct.
How does that
And
even happen? Like
they interviewed Ruth Montgomery. Ruth Montgomery was a psychic. She had worked with Edgar Casey. She was the originator, rather, of the walk-in theory. These entities, I think, have evolved past that, because walking in with, like I said, the apparition doesn't fit the body. It doesn't
mm,
make it, so that they're not after that. They want a body that looks like their apparition. So they started looking at that aspect of, okay, what if they're all the same, OBEs, NDEs, and abductions, and they formed a term called kidnappings. And if you pay close attention to people like Lou Elizondo and different researchers that are in the government, there's a dog whistle they loose, and they'll call them kidnappings and not abductions. Why? Because that's a Collins elite motif. The reason they
mm,
called them kidnappings and abductions is because kidnappings occur without consent. Right.
Yeah, and that happens. Like, I don't know, and I'm gonna leave out the part of soul contracts because that's a whole nother
Right.
talk.
Yeah.
Like, people don't want this to happen.
Right.
Like, we want and maybe the good visitations are them priming us just to get used to having weird entities in our room. We don't know. But
Hmm.
I have, before any I've had a pretty fair amount of both. So, good ones and bad ones, or low vibrational, high vibrational, whatever language you want
Right.
to use.
Hmm.
Light, dark, people have all these different definitions and terms they use, but it's just, yeah, like, they didn't ask you. Like, I don't know one person that wants to be violated
Hmm.
in those ways, or to be
Yes.
tricked, right? Or manipulated in
Cor-
general to think that you're sleeping with your husband or
Oh
whatever,
my
and
God.
then,
Yeah.
and then
I did I'm sorry. Go ahead.
just the biological effects the next day for people. Um, Women will wake up getting their menses, like, crazy early, unusual, almost like a miscarriage, after some of these visitations in the dream realm. So,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. This whole idea of the afterlife being involved in this phenomenon cannot be discounted or ignored.
right.
Um, I was doing a lecture on the incubi phenomenon a couple of years ago, and I didn't realize that there was an experiencer present. And he reached out to me afterwards, like, listen, he goes, I got to tell you a story. And he's like, me and my wife are both experiencers. And he said, the craziest thing happened to us last year. He said, I don't know who to talk to about it, but I'll figure I'll give you a shot. I said, okay. He said one night, it was about like 2:30. It was, 2:30 in the morning. And he said, we're both asleep. And he said, next thing I know, I feel something moving underneath the covers of my bed. He said, at first blush, I thought it was my wife maybe having restless leg syndrome, or she was having a nightmare. He said, but next thing I know, something cold, like cold flesh, pressed against the side of me. He said, so I woke up, and he said, when my eyes adjusted to the darkness, there was a small body shaped over the covers were draping it. He said, but it looked like some small creature or a being underneath my covers. He said, he said, so I opened the covers, and he said, there sat a like a 5 or 6 year old girl, and he said she looked very charred.
Hmm.
Okay. And he said she was very pale and greenish. And he says, at first, I said, I thought I was dreaming. And he said, so I reached out to grab her, because if it's a dream, it's just, whatever. He said, but
Yeah.
then I touched her, and he said, I picked her up. And when I did, he said, she looked at me and said, I'm dead. And she said, my brother's also dead. My brother's in the corner of the room. She said, I know I'm dead, but he doesn't know he's dead yet. And so
Wow.
he said, I looked in the corner of the room, and there is her brother just looking at him. He said, the reason I'm telling you the story is because I've seen that girl in an abduction.
Wow.
Right. So there's an avenue of disincarnate, disembodied consciousness involved with this phenomenon. And I do believe that's why they're abducting souls, and that's why they know about them, is because they're in that dimension themselves. Not to say they can't possess a body, they can, but it's the apparitional self. I think that's their true nature, and that's their true manifestation.
That makes a lot of sense, with the whole theory behind, interdimensional beings. Because
Correct.
if you're even a human spirit on the other side, heaven, underworld, whatever you believe in,
Hmm.
you are not a physical body how we know
Right.
it here. It's your soul. It's an apparition. It's energetic. It's,
Correct.
some people call it like your astral body, and there's all sorts of terms for it. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So somebody had a question in here. If you
Okay.
don't mind answering it, I know that we're running
Mhm.
an hour. I don't want to keep you all
It's
night.
okay.
I could talk
I
to
got
you
a
all
little.
night.
I got a few more minutes, so I'm down with the
Okay.
question. That's fine.
So, and this is a question a lot of people come to me with for some reason.
Okay.
Their dream life. It sounds super weird to say that, to some people maybe, but so if they're seeing a lot of like UFO activity or contactee scenarios in their dreams,
Mhm.
what does that mean they need to, what can they do about that? How should they interpret it, or how should they start digging into it, even like just to
It
scratch
would
the surface?
it would depend on what their dream life is, like what it consists of. There's a lot of attachments, like these entities. Again, in the field of ufology, they call it the hitchhiker effect.
Yes.
That's in my research, it's just called hauntology. It's
Hmm.
being haunted. Really,
Yeah.
it is. It's the same thing. They just have different terms for it. But I would want to know what the dream life is. I've had cases where people have attachments that only manifest in the dream, and they use that kind of connection to manifest in reality, like in this dimension. And so, what do you feel in the dream? Do you wake up with a heaviness? Do you wake up like, is there depression?
Mm,
Is there suicidal ideation? What's going on
mm,
here?
mm,
Because a lot of times what will happen is that we will see things we're not allowed to or we were not supposed to. And then when we get back to this dimension, they'll haunt us.
mhm.
Skinwalker Ranch case studies tell us all about that, where we witness too much. And so it's like Nietzsche said, you look deep enough into the darkness, it looks back at you. But
Mhm.
if that was my case, I would want to know what's going on. What are you visualizing? What are you experiencing? And that's where I would go with it.
Is there anything that people can do to protect themselves from opening up to this? You know,
Yeah.
like some
Well,
people want to contact beings, they do the CE5 or human initiated contacts, or
yeah.
if you're a witch and you're like, oh, I want to work with some dark and dirty, stuff. And then
No,
all of a
no.
sudden, but without even opening up, people are without even like opening up on purpose, people are experiencing it. Is there anything they can do to, um, stop it, prevent it,
Mhm.
protect against it?
Well, I would suggest to use religious amulets to the best of your knowledge and your capability. Whatever your tradition is, use that. I'm not saying that I'm going to prescribe that in the sense of, okay, it's going to work 100%. The case study suggests that sometimes it does work,
Mm.
sometimes it doesn't. Now, there is some kind of abhorrence these entities have about iron. In antiquity, we had mothers who were impregnated by these creatures, and this wild phenomenon. But what they would do in Mesopotamia is they would create a second face and wear that second face as a necklace. Because what Lamishtu would do is she would descend down at nighttime, look in their eyes, and then as they were looking in the
Oh,
eyes, they would take the child out of the womb. It's heartbreaking to realize how far we are, but that's what they were doing. But they also employed iron. And I'm not the only researcher that suggests that they have some kind of hatred for it. They don't like it. I
yeah.
don't care. I don't know what it is, but it does tend to work against them. Now that's what I would suggest. I'm not going to get into what doesn't work because that's not what the question is. But I would
Yeah.
suggest doing that.
Yes, yes. Yeah, that's because a lot of people dabble in things and then they find themselves, but I have heard the iron thing,
Yeah,
like, the best advice is to not, if something has a bad reputation, it's probably for a
hmm
reason. So
yeah,
be mindful of that. But
one
yeah,
hundred percent.
the iron thing I've heard from a lot of different people and a lot of different belief systems
hmm
from
We don't
Christians
know
to
why.
witches.
We don't know why it works. Like Steve Mayer, like I said, he's a parapsychologist in the UK. Him and Barry Fitzgerald have both, they both agree with that theory that iron does kind of push them away. But one thing is very it's evident, and it's this dogma. See, like my dad, when I was growing up, my dad's like, don't research that, because it'll attach itself to you.
Right,
This is almost like a virus. It's very unique because we have people that are atheists that are being abducted,
right.
Christians, Muslims, Jews, all this, and yet it's almost like again they're transcending that. Um, but that would be my answer: iron, and then religious amulets.
Okay. Yeah, because I know, I think somebody asked it earlier about having UFO dreams and if it meant anything, but, I always tell people to start writing them down because you can analyze it and see if there's patterns if you keep writing them down, but
I was just going to say that exactly right. Yeah, and a lot of people, what I would suggest is this: don't just follow the manifestations. We have a lot of experiencers right now that are wanting to become prophets. It's about two of them right now in the field. That it's not just the manifestations. Now they're trying to teach doctrine, right?
hmm.
Oh, I've got this new revelation I got to teach you. And
Yeah,
I
I don't
think what's happened, right? You feel what I'm
you gotta
getting at,
watch
right?
out for
You
that
understand?
because that's happened throughout time, and
Correct.
it's very rare that somebody is right about what they've received as a channeling.
Correct. And let me give you a case study. It's right out of a book called Beyond UFO. This an individual was in a catastrophic bicycle or it was a motorcycle accident, pulled out of his body again, apparitional. and they tell him, if you don't become our prophet, we're going to kill you. We're going to let your body die. We're going to take your soul. You're going to become our prophet. And so a lot of times, if you look at the pathology of these entities, a lot of them are trying to create prophets. And it's so I don't, obviously I study ufology in terms of experiences and all. I love that. I think it's fascinating, and it gives us a lot of implications. But what I guard myself from are people who use that experience to shape our belief system and to say, hey, listen, this is what I believe they are. And then even move into this. I'm the supreme authority over them.
Yeah.
I get to define your experience because this is what I experienced. So there is some kind of narcissistic supremacy that I think, and I'm not going to, obviously there's no names, I'm not doing that, but that there's a lot, some people
We've all
can
met
have.
one. We've all met somebody like that. So
Yeah. Well,
they're like,
yeah,
I'm training to be an ascended master. And and you're like,
yeah.
we all want to get to the ascended master status, but I'm probably not going to be on Earth right now with all this. We all have
Correct.
our petty crap, and that we.
Yeah, I'm still wondering why Chipotle's guacamole is so expensive. I'm not an ascended master yet,
Right? It's not even real, man.
Whole
So
different
anyway.
ball game. Yeah, it's like what? But yeah, so I'm not saying that my theory is 100% correct. What I'm saying is, at the very least, history has a lot of data to consider, and that these entities have been around here for millennia.
Yes.
Period.
Jeff says something interesting. Hey, Jeff, I'm so happy to see you, and everybody else that joined later on after I said hello to everybody. He says, irons at the Earth's core. It could be that it's one of the most. Yep, it's super. Oh, I should probably read it because people are going to be listening to this audio. Iron is at the Earth's core. It could be that it has the most grounding properties into this earthen existence, and that's true. Some people feel the urge to, like after an experience, to go outside. Or a lot of people have these crazy like dream visitations, and then they're like, I need to be in nature, and they'll just go like my friend, she just started camping and meditating. She bought a camper, the whole family would go, and it healed her in a way, and she'd be out there without shoes sitting under a tree, and she was Christian. She was like just wanted to be close to something pure that God created.
That's very important.
So
very good point too.
But because I think that's the, what you believe in kind of is going to dictate like your, it's kind of like the whole like law of attraction thing without the actual law of attraction. People listening that have read all those books, they're going to get on me about it.
Like,
you can't say anything, like kind of like the you are what you eat. To dumb it down a little,
I'm chicken wings and ranch, baby. I'm chicken wings and ranch.
Or Chipotle guacamole, apparently.
Yeah. I'm sharing all my secrets tonight, man.
So how to protect against demons and where to not pay for guacamole. That's exactly what we learned.
Right. You're going to get it all.
But he's right. And we, as humans, there's been, a lot of people talking about like their circadian rhythm being fixed after camping. And, I camped from Arizona to Alaska, and I had never been, I felt so like, I felt lighter. I don't know how to explain it. And that's when I started being able to lucid dream more powerfully. And that's like, that could be probably 2 more episodes. Lucid dreaming, when people learn how to fight back in their dreams against these things, is a big thing. And
yeah, again, you're exactly right. You're hitting the nail on the head here, because, I think that if anything, these entities are alerting us of that hidden potentiality we have within us, right? That God version of our ghost, that portion of us that exists. And some people don't even believe in it. Look how advanced they are. They don't care if you believe in it. Right? They don't care. They'll take it out of you without your permission. Now, here's something. This is a whole other episode. There are people that have had this done to them that don't even know they've had it done to them. They've yet to have the memories come to the surface. And so this gets into Dr. Carl Turner's work. It's not just, okay, are they farming us, but are there people who have been taken and that their memory has been restricted from them? Just like Dr. Carla Turner, her husband, Casey, until the trauma starts to erupt, and, headaches and, migraines and all this. Then they realize, okay, there's a form of PTSD that haunts me. But so, that's really where I'm at in my research, is that, again, it's not just bodily abduction. They're abducting the soul. And I do believe, how many people have been abducted and threatened? You don't become a prophet, we're going to kill you. And they never return to tell their story.
Wow.
Which would make them soul hunters. It's but yeah, I can keep going. But that's really where I'm at in my
Yeah, we're
research,
gonna
is
have a part
understanding
2.
that new
You're
stuff.
coming back, so
Awesome. Awesome. I hope so. Thank
because
you.
this is like those talks that I love, and I've seen the audience or the live chat saying like, "I live for these chats." I'm so happy to have
Awesome.
found this
Awesome.
community. I was telling you,
Thank you.
I'm not. I even if it's scary and some people need to hear it. But yes,
Mhm,
that's another thing. Like we don't think about stuff like that. Like I somebody had mentioned something like that to me a long time ago. Well,
mhm.
last year, not a long time ago. I had a friend very disappointed that the event didn't happen in this timeline that he was in, and
Okay.
it affected him like really emotionally. Like this person got
Mhm,
depressed, and I'm like, what happened to him? And he's like,
mhm,
this earth is just a soul trap. And I was like, and I'm like, maybe I'm cocky because I feel like I've learned how to like fight back in the dream realm finally,
mhm,
and
mhm,
it doesn't happen as often anymore. So to me, I'm like,
mhm.
nobody's gonna take my damn soul. Like I'm stubborn, right? But like
Right.
if you don't know that it's happening
Mhm,
and your consciousness is just gone and you're
mhm.
just this person walking around, that could explain a lot of how people like are different out of nowhere one day.
Right, right.
Like
Where
that's
you can
like
look
a
at them and the consciousness can look at you and you not
yes.
realize it because yeah, it's a very, and again, this is a form of possession. Um, possession itself was not just designed to relocate consciousness; it was to replicate life. Right? I'll place my
I've
con
never heard of it like that. And it makes sense.
right to self-replicate. And so, if you could have five different grays or five different bodies and have one consciousness possessing them all, which we've seen evidence of in abductions. One of them was in the Rimmelsham. Well, it wasn't abduction, but the Rimmelsham Forest incident.
Yeah.
If you guys want to, case references, Peter Robbins, he talks about it a lot. All five or six different creatures, and they all looked up at the same time. The consciousness was shared, and the idea is you can kill one, and the entity itself still be alive because you killed the hardware.
Mhm.
The software is right. It's still present.
Yeah, it's like the internet. It's out there. It's everywhere.
Right. Right.
Wi-Fi demons or something. I'm not trying to be funny. I'm just trying to like,
No, I know what you're saying.
it's like a web,
Yeah.
the
The
interweb.
Apocrypha of
Yeah.
John called them, they said that once these entities created bodies that looked like their apparitions, they didn't just stop with that one copy. It said they made copies
Yes.
of the body. Literally, and this is going to be getting into the gray study, study of the grays, whether we have bodies that look exactly like each
Right.
other.
And that's not
Very
uncommon in the
interesting.
UFO world, right? Like people talk
Hmm.
about the grays being like AI or clones or drones, not like the
Hmm.
flying drones, but like in a sense where like, they're just doing their job, working, they were created to do
Hmm.
this or that. And
Hmm.
yeah, so that would make sense as well. So you have like a really interesting take on all this. I definitely want to have you back for a part 2,
Awesome.
even if it's for Q&A only because people had some good questions.
Okay.
It's just we only have like an hour because I don't want to keep everybody up
I
late.
understand. I understand. It's all good.
And
I'd love to come back. That means it went well. I mean, like I said, a lot of this is dark and a lot of it's new, and so it's difficult how to measure how is it going to
right.
go. So
Well, I think that
I'll
anybody that
welcome coming
studies
back.
the abduction phenomena realize that
Mhm.
there's a dark side. The
Right.
people that think that it's only love and light when it comes to contacting other
Mhm.
beings
Mhm.
haven't had the experience or they haven't remembered it yet.
Right.
So they're not going to be listening to me because I piss them off. So you are welcome back for a part 2.
Awesome.
Everybody in
Awesome.
the
Thank you.
chat, thank you so much for joining. I appreciate your support. I know Wednesday night is a busy night for shows. Yep, Brad says this is campfire shit. Yep. That's why I tell people I wanted it to be like campfire talks or like I remember going to cafes and talking to people about this stuff, not this exactly,
Mhm.
but like deep conversation, and that's why I decided to call it cafe in the name of the
Sweet.
channel because I want to have these deep conversations.
That's good.
And also, do you have anything coming up where people should follow you? I put your Instagram on because when I went
Yep.
to the website I had, it wasn't
Yeah. I don't
cooperating.
know why it's still in my bio. I got to take it out of my bio.
Okay. So
Yeah.
find him on Instagram.
I got on my Instagram. I have a YouTube channel
Yes.
and I have a Facebook, and it's all under the same name, Nathaniel
Okay.
Gillis. Yeah, so that's where I'm at. I honestly, I haven't looked at my schedule. I know I'm booked up through. I'm always like 2 or 3 months ahead, so I don't know what show I'm doing next. God forgive me for
Yeah, if
that,
you
but I do have
think
shows coming up,
about
and I'll
it.
post them.
Yeah,
Oh, what
post
the?
about it and tag me and I'll share it and all that stuff.
Okay. Thank
Hang
you.
out for a minute afterwards. I'm going to say goodbye
Okay.
to everybody. Everybody that's listening on Anomalous Podcast Network, thank you so much for listening. If you're watching this on YouTube, thank you so much. And to support the channel, please like, share, subscribe. This goes for Nathaniel's channel as well. I'll add his YouTube link in the description after we finish here. And there's other ways to support the channel in the description. Have a great night, and everybody that joined live in the live chat, you know I love you. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate every one of you. Have a great night.